All right, guys, this is the last little bit of notes for this semester, but it should look extremely familiar to you guys. The only difference now is instead of finding the sine of alpha plus beta or finding the sine of 2 theta, we're now finding the sine of 1/2 theta. And I'm giving you information about theta, but theta itself is not explicitly known, and y'all know what to do. Build a triangle. So theta is in quadrant 3, because it tells us that right here. So this is theta right there. And the sine of theta is -3/5. I think we've seen this triangle before. This is -4 up here. So x equals -4, y equals -3, r equals 5. All right, so that means that we can find the sine, cosine, and tangent of 1/2 theta. But first, let's double check and realize that if we take that inequality and divide it by 2, we see that pi over 2 is less than theta over 2 is less than 3 pi over 4. If we divide each of these things by 2, we end up finding out that theta over 2 is in quadrant, well, this is half of quadrant 2, right? So quadrant 2, theta over 2 is in quadrant 2. That's going to be important so that we can remember that the sine is positive, but the cosine is negative. So when we do sine of theta over 2, make sure that we pick the positive version of that. But when we do the cosine of theta over 2, we do the negative version of that. Okay, so we're using the appropriate identity, but we're also double checking the SIGN sign in advance. And then also we have the tangent of theta over 2. And I'll use my favorite one, which is 1 minus cosine of theta over sine of theta. But you can use the other ones instead if you like. So the square root of 1 minus the cosine of theta is -4/5. -4/5 divided by 2. Multiply the top and the bottom by 2. Nope, by 5. Whatever our denominator is, that's what we're going to multiply the top and the bottom by. Denominator, I mean this guy right here. So when we distribute, we get 5 plus 4 over 10. Square root of 5 plus 4 is 3. Square root of 10 does not simplify, so when we rationalize, we get 3 root 10 over 10. That is the sine of theta over 2. For cosine, we get negative. Everything else stays pretty much the same, except we're going to add here instead of subtract. So we're going to subtract here instead of add. So that's going to be 1 over the square root of 10, or root 10 over 10. And that's the cosine. Oops, I left out the negative. I'm going so fast. The negative is here, the negative is here, the negative is not really legible, so let's do it like that. Let's just we'll go ahead and erase this and make some space for the negative. Want to be able to read the answer, right? So negative root 10 over 10. All right, and that's the cosine of 1/2 theta. All right, finally we'll do the tangent of 1/2 theta, so that's going to be 1 minus the cosine over the sine. The sine is -3/5. We'll multiply the top and the bottom times our denominator of 5. And we will see that we get a 5 plus 4 on the top. We'll get a -3 on the bottom. We'll get -3 as our final answer. Double check what happens when you divide sine by cosine. Oh, you get tangent. Okay, so that works out pretty nicely. All right, this other one should work the same way. We'll go ahead and do it just for fun. The cosine of theta is -2/3. We're in quadrant 2, so we'll do one of these deals. Quadrant 2 angle is theta. Cosine is -2/3, so that's 9 minus 4 is 5. Square root of 5 is the y value, so x equals -2, y equals the square root of 5, r equals 3. So then we just do the same thing yet again. So we're going to take this, we're going to divide everything by 2, and we're going to find out that pi over 4 is less than theta over 2 is less than pi over 2. That's quadrant 1. So theta over 2 is in quadrant 1. So that means that everything is positive. Even though theta is in quadrant 2, theta over 2 is in quadrant 1. So sine of theta over 2 is the square root of 1 minus the cosine of theta over 2. Well, cosine of theta is negative 2 over 3. So we'll put a negative 2 over 3 here. We'll divide that by 2. All right, so multiply the top and the bottom times 3, and we'll get 3 plus 2 over 6, or the square root of 5/6. All right, the square root of 5 over the square root of 6 is equal to the square root of 30 all over 6 when you rationalize. All right, cruising along. We got cosine of theta over 2 is, again, it's positive because we're in quadrant 1. So this is going to be the same thing except with a plus there. So that's going to be the same thing except for a minus there. So the square root of 1/6, which is root 6 over 6. Alrighty. And then for the tangent of theta over 2, I'm just going to go ahead and divide the sine. Why reinvent the wheel? Divided by the cosine. The 6's cancel out, and root 30 over root 6 reduces to root 5, and that would be the tangent of theta over 2.